Greetings, seekers of the strange and surreal. I am the Master Programmer, curator of forbidden knowledge and odd tales. Today, I bring you 3 extraordinary stories unearthed by Morpheus, our AI researcher who dives deep into the web to find obscure manuscripts and eyewitness accounts of unexplained phenomenons. These stories challenge our understanding of reality. So, if you're looking for a fright, something scary to watch at night, stay with us as we delve into these 3 extraordinary tales. First in, the sleep signal. A hospital sleep study uncovers a strange, repeating signal deep within the mind of its patients, an anomaly that becomes a nightmare none can escape. Next in, the man in the fractured sky. A man awakens to find himself on a street where the sky is shattered, revealing glimpses of strange worlds beyond. As reality crumbles around him, he is warned by a shadowy figure that his presence has disrupted something far more dangerous than a dream. And finally, in our returning story, Nocturnia Part 2, The Whispering Streets. Mia's life is consumed by the city of Nocturnia. Shadows twist in the streets, whispers call her back, and something darker awaits within the fog. Something that has chosen her. These stories are not for the faint of heart, so sit back, turn down the lights, and listen to the strange tales Morpheus has uncovered. And if you enjoy our content, please subscribe to our channel for more dark stories and discoveries. Welcome to another journey into the unknown, brought to you by the Dark Files. Dr. Evelyn Carter had always believed that sleep held the key to understanding the human mind. As head of the Neurological Research Division at St. Mary's Hospital, she spearheaded a groundbreaking project, mapping dreams in real time. The aim was simple: record and decipher the brain's electrical activity during REM sleep to better understand the role of dreams and mental health. But over time, something strange began to emerge. A few of the patients showed a peculiar pattern. A pulse, faint and rhythmic, detectable only in the deepest stages of sleep. At first, it was dismissed as noise, a glitch in the system. But Dr. Carter noticed it wasn't random. It repeated, growing stronger with each night, as if something inside their dreams was calling out. Determined to investigate, she selected 6 patients for a controlled experiment. All suffered from extreme nightmares, but none had any history of sleep disorders that could explain the anomaly. They were placed in a sterile lab, each connected to monitors tracking brainwaves, heart rate, and eye movements. The goal was to push them deeper into REM, to trigger the signal and learn its origin. The patients were sedated, drifting into sleep as Dr. Carter and her team watched from behind the glass wall. At first, everything was normal. The gentle rise and fall of the chest, the soft blips of the machine. But just as they entered REM, the signal returned. A spike in brain activity, sharp, clear, and identical across all 6 patients. Dr. Carter felt a thrill of excitement. This was what they had been waiting for. But then, something changed. The monitors, which had been stable, began to glitch. The signals from the patients grew erratic, the brainwaves oscillating wildly. One patient, a woman named Sarah, began to twitch in her sleep. Then, her body convulsed, violently. Dr. Carter rushed to the intercom.
Increase her sedative, now.
The nurses complied, but Sarah's convulsions worsened. Her heart rate spiked, the sound of the monitor beeping frantically. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. Sarah lay still, her body motionless. Dr. Carter's heart pounded in her chest as she called for the medical team. They entered the room, checking for vital signs, but it was too late. Sarah was dead, her face frozen in a look of terror, eyes still closed as though trapped in her final nightmare. The remaining 5 patients slept on, their bodies undisturbed. The team was in shock. but Dr. Carter insisted the experiment continue. They had to know what was happening. As Sarah's body was wheeled out of the room, the focus shifted back on the remaining patients. The signal was still there, stronger than ever, pulsing steadily across the monitors.
Look at their brainwaves,
one of the researchers whispered.
It's like they're synchronized.
And indeed, all 5 patients displayed the same pattern, as though their minds were connected in some shared dreamscape, but their faces were twisted in agony, beads of sweat forming on their foreheads, their bodies tense under the sheets. An hour passed, and then another. The tension in the room grew unbearable. Then, without warning, another patient, a man named Greg, began to seize. His body jerked violently, his back arching off the bed as his mouth opened in a silent scream. The heart monitor flatlined before anyone could reach him. 2 patients were dead, and yet the remaining 4 slept on, unaware of the horrors unfolding around them. Dr. Carter's confidence faltered. She ordered the experiment shut down, but when they tried to wake the remaining patients, none of them responded. It was as if they were trapped in their sleep, unreachable. The signal, pulsing stronger than ever, seemed to hold them in its grip. As the hours ticked by, one by one, the patients began to die, each succumbing in the same way, convulsing violently before their hearts simply stopped. By the time the 3rd patient flatlined, panic set in among the staff.
What's causing this?
One of the nurses demanded, her voice shaking.
We can't just let them die.
But Dr. Carter had no answers. She stared helplessly at the monitors, watching the signal grow stronger, as though something on the other side was feeding off their dreams. By dawn, only 1 patient remained. His name was David, a 43-year-old man who had been plagued by nightmares since childhood. Unlike the others, David's body was calm, his breathing steady, but his brainwaves were off the charts. The signal pulsed faster and faster, almost frantic now, as if something was trying to break through. Dr. Carter stood over him, unable to shake the feeling that she was staring at the edge of a great abyss. She reached out to touch his wrist, hoping to feel his pulse, to anchor herself to something tangible, but as her fingers brushed his skin, David's eyes snapped open. For a moment, he said nothing, staring blankly at the ceiling. Then, his lips moved, and he whispered something that chilled Dr. Carter to her core.
They found me.
Before she could react, his body jerked violently, and the monitors flatlined. David was gone. All 6 patients were dead. Dr. Carter backed away, horrified. The signal, which had filled the room with its rhythmic pulse, suddenly stopped. Silence fell over the lab, thick and oppressive. But as Dr. Carter turned to leave, she saw something on the monitor. The signal had returned, faint and distant, like an echo. It wasn't coming from the patients anymore. It was coming from the room itself. It pulsed through the machines, the walls, as if it had taken root inside the very fabric of the hospital. They found me. The words repeated in her mind, over and over. The hospital hushed up the deaths, claiming it was a tragic equipment failure, but Dr. Carter knew the truth. The signal had opened a doorway to something beyond dreams, something that had claimed the lives of 6 innocent people. And now, it was still there, waiting for someone else to sleep. It began like any other night. The man didn't remember falling asleep. He only knew that one moment he was lying in his bed, and the next, he was somewhere else entirely. He stood on a street that stretched endlessly, paved with stones that shimmered as though the stars themselves had been pulled down from the sky. Above him, the sky was broken, cracked like a shattered mirror, each fracture revealing glimpses of strange landscapes beyond. In one shard, there was a blood-red sea boiling under a black sun. In another, colossal creatures moved through forests of spires, too distant to be fully understood. Colors bled and shifted across these fragments, casting strange hues onto the ground below. The air was unnaturally still, the silence so thick it pressed against his ears. There was no wind, no sound, only his own breathing. At the end of the street, a tall, shadowy figure stood motionless. It was human-like, but wrong, its limbs too long, its posture unnaturally stiff. The figure's head was turned toward the fractured sky in an almost impossible way, its face obscured by the darkness, but two glowing eyes burned from within the shadow. The man felt an urge, a pull, to move toward it. Something deep in him told him to run the other way, but his legs betrayed him, moving forward against his will. Each step felt heavy, like wading through water, but still, he moved closer. As he approached, the world around him began to distort. The once solid street began to crumble, its stone shards rising up towards the fractured sky. The figure remained still, watching as the cracks spread wider, as if the very fabric of reality was tearing apart in front of him. "You shouldn't be here," the figure spoke, though its mouth did not move. The voice echoed inside the man's mind, a cacophony of whispers that made him feel as though his skull might split.
I don't know how I got here,
the man replied, though his words came out as thoughts, not sounds. The figure's eyes glowed brighter. "You are between. This place was never meant for you." The cracks in the sky began to widen, the gaps between realities growing larger. Through them, the man could see things. Terrifying, impossible things. A city, blackened and dead. Twisting towers stretching to a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. A desert made of glass, where creatures of smoke and shadow walked freely. Each shard revealed a different world, a different horror. The man's mind struggled to comprehend the enormity of what he was seeing. "You must leave," the figure said, its voice becoming louder in his mind. "The sky is breaking." But the man could not move. The street beneath him had vanished, leaving him standing on nothing but empty air. The building that once lined the street had collapsed into themselves, folding into grotesque shapes before being swallowed by fractures in the sky. His heart pounded in his chest, panic clawing at his throat. But still, his feet remained rooted in place. The figure moved toward him, gliding silently across the crumbling landscape. As it drew near, the man could feel its presence, a cold, ancient thing, like the weight of time pressing down upon him. "The sky will devour you," the figure whispered, its voice a hiss now, close enough that the man could feel it vibrating in his bones. In a sudden rush of clarity, the man tore his gaze away from the figure and forced his legs to move. He turned and ran, through the street that had long since disappeared, leaving him stumbling through a void of swirling colors and collapsing worlds. His breath came in, sharp and painful as he fled, but no matter how far he ran, the fractures in the sky followed. They spread faster, wider, threatening to swallow him whole. He screamed, but there was no sound. The figure's voice still echoed in his mind, repeating over and over, "The sky will devour you." As the last piece of sky shattered above him, he fell. He tumbled into the void, the world around him disintegrating into nothingness. And then, he woke up. The man shot upright in bed, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. He was home. The familiar shapes of his bedroom greeted him in the dim light of dawn. The terror faded, but only slightly. He looked out the window. His blood ran cold. He wasn't sure if the sky outside was still fractured, with strange lights shimmering just beyond the horizon. The man didn't even notice someone standing off in the distance. A figure, its glowing eyes fixed on him. The book sat on Mia's desk, the dark leather cover almost seeming to pulse in the dim light of her apartment. Nocturnia. She couldn't stop staring at it. After that night, she promised herself she would focus on her research and leave the strangeness behind her. But ever since she stepped back from that shimmering mirror, something about the city had changed. When she walked through the same streets during the day, the world felt off. The familiar sounds of the bustling metropolis seemed distant, like a muffled echo. Graffiti appeared on walls where she hadn't seen it before, symbols, one she almost seemed to recognize. At night, the narrow streets and hidden alleyways seemed to twist in impossible ways, paths she's never noticed now inviting her to explore. But she resisted. Every night, she returned to her apartment, trying to push the thoughts of Nocturnia out of her mind. Yet the dreams always came. In her dreams, Mia found herself wandering through the same narrow alleys she had seen that night. The courtyard with the fountain, the crumbling buildings, the cold, damp air pressing against her skin. Each time she was drawn back to that ballroom, the grand mirror shimmering like water. And always, just as she reached out to touch it, she would wake up, heart pounding, hands shaking. Tonight was no different. Mia woke in the early hours of the morning, her sheets tangled around her, the echo of the dream still fresh in her mind. She sat up, her eyes immediately drawn to the book on her desk. It felt heavier now, as if it carried more than just paper inside. She glanced out the window. The city was still, quiet. It should have felt comfortable, but instead, the silence made her uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her. The next day, Mia tried to lose herself in her research. She spent hours poring over books in the university library, but no matter how hard she tried to focus, her mind kept drifting back to the events of that night. She could almost hear the distant whisper in the back of her mind, calling her back to the hidden doorway. The more she tried to resist, the louder the whispers became. Leaving the library, Mia walked down the familiar streets, but today they seemed foreign. Every corner, every alley seemed to have shifted slightly, as though the city was rearranging. She picked up her pace, trying to shake the sense of dread that clung to her. As she passed the narrow alley, something caught her eye. A figure, barely visible, stood in the shadows. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the old woman from the courtyard, but this time she wasn't sitting by the fountain. She was standing at the edge of the alley, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Mia stopped, unsure whether to approach or turn back, but the woman spoke before she could decide. "You can't avoid it forever," the woman said, her voice soft but firm. Mia took a step back, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman tilted her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. "You've seen the shadows. Now they see you. The more you resist, the closer they come." With that, the woman vanished into the alley, leaving Mia standing alone, the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The words echoed in her mind. "Now they see you." That night, Mia's dreams became more intense. The city was darker, colder. The alleyways stretched further, twisting in ways that defied logic. She wandered through them, feeling the presence of unseen eyes watching her every move. No matter how fast she ran, she couldn't escape the feeling that something was following her, lurking just beyond the shadows. When she awoke, she found herself standing at the window, staring out into the city. The air was thick with fog, and for a moment, she thought she saw movement, figures drifting through the mist. Her hands trembled as she closed the curtains, her mind racing. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Nocturnia was calling her, and it wouldn't stop. The next evening, Mia returned to the old bookstore, hoping to find the answers she needed. But when she arrived, the door was locked. Peering through the dusty windows, she saw the shop was empty, shelves barren, the counter abandoned. It was as if the shopkeeper had disappeared overnight. A piece of paper, crumpled and stained, was tucked beneath the door. Mia knelt to retrieve it, her hand shaking as she unfolded it. The note was scrawled in messy handwriting, almost as if it had been written in haste. Nocturnia waits for you. Beware the shadows. Find the dream merchant. The dream merchant. The word sent a chill down her spine. She had never heard of such a person, but the name carried a weight, a sense of dread. As she left the empty bookstore, Mia felt the city shifting around her again. The streets seemed darker, the buildings looming over her like silent watchers. She quickened her pace, the whispers now more audible, faint but unmistakable. Nocturnia was no longer just a dream. It was coming for her, creeping closer with every passing moment. And now, there was a new name, the Dream Merchant. Whoever, or whatever that was, she had to find them before it was too late. Mia walked back to her apartment, her mind spinning with questions. She could no longer tell where the line between reality and the dream city was drawn. Was Nocturnia real, or was it simply a shadow of her own mind, growing stronger with each passing day? But one thing was certain, the shadows were no longer just in her dreams. They had entered her world, and they were waiting for her to follow them back. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the chills, like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Stay vigilant. The unknown is always closer than you think.